Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Global Health Talks, On the Brighter Side. In each episode of the podcast, I talk to incredibly inspiring global health professionals whose work is offering hope for a better and healthier tomorrow. I'm Nika Stasny, a global health PhD student and your host. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Tamara Giles-Vernick to the podcast. Dr. Giles-Vernick is a researcher at Institut Pasteur, head of the first social sciences unit in its history, whose work sits at the intersection of medical anthropology, ethnohistory, and health. In other words, she studies how culture, history, and human behavior shape the way diseases emerge, spread, and are addressed through global health interventions, with focus on infectious diseases transmissions and interventions in African countries. In addition to her research, she's also coordinator of the Sonar Cities project, which aims to strengthen the resilience of European cities in the face of health emergencies and disasters by ensuring that marginalized and often overlooked populations are included in preparedness and response efforts. Today, she joins us to share more about her work, her journey, and most important lessons she's learned along the way. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Tamara. We'll just get right into it. I'm so curious about your research journey. Can you tell us a little bit more about what even drew you to studying African history?
First of all, Nika, I'm delighted to be here. That's actually a really difficult question. I mean, it's more difficult than one might expect, because on one hand, I could give you this very sort of pat, coherent narrative. And yet the way that my career and my interests have unfolded is, to a certain extent, I could never have predicted this when I was, 16 years old or anything like that. But what I would say is that first of all, that social justice was a really important part of my becoming an adult or becoming a person, which I think of as a kind of long processual um, um, experience, and one that unfolds over time, and that I, like everybody else, is still, even at my age, in the process of becoming. So I think at a certain point, maybe in my, I don't know, in my kind of maybe late adolescence, early adulthood, I think at the same time as there was this emphasis on social justice, there was also a very pragmatic bent in my family. And nobody had ever been a researcher in my family. We were, just kind of staunchly middle class, Californians, in fact. And, I was sort of raised with the idea that you're not really going to go out and get a PhD, or you'll never get a job. You need to go into business so that you can make a living and all of that. And at a certain point, I just realized that didn't really fit with the way I saw myself, that I saw my place as a young person in a kind of an expanding world. And so I ended up applying to an organization called the Peace Corps, which you may or may not have heard about it, but it's something that started under the Kennedy administration in the early 1960s, and was basically designed to bring volunteers, usually young people, but not always, to other parts of the world. And, we can take a step back and look at it as kind of, at that point, we won't even comment on the present, but at that point, kind of U.S. soft power, right? You put hopefully charming young people in the middle of someplace else in a low income or middle income country, and hope that this is something that will cultivate good relations between, or a good impression of, the United States. And what I realized in the course of working for a development project, which, to be honest, was kind of useless, is how important perceptions in the local communities, their perceptions of the past, were in shaping their engagements with the present, with development projects, with the state, and the like. And it was that recognition of kind of how the past really shaped present actions, relations, processes that compelled me to go and do a PhD in African history. But just by way of background, at the time that I was a volunteer, I spent, I would say, nearly 3 years there in Central African Republic, in a village of about 250 people, and sort of working in the area on various activities, but a lot on gardening and collective gardening and things like that. Um, so at any rate, that's kind of what propelled me into the direction of doing a PhD in history. And at the time, um, I went at a certain point to Johns Hopkins University to pursue my PhD, and it was a really kind of remarkable place at the time, really because I sort of at that time, really for the first time in my life, was exposed to anthropology because the historians all trained with the anthropologists to the extent that when we all emerged, we had no idea what kind of disciplinary hat we were supposed to be wearing. It was, relentlessly multidisciplinary. So at the same time that I got training from historians, I also got training from anthropologists, and so that was a kind of formative experience in my, I think, intellectual development. But the other thing that I want to point out is that even though I really ended up training for an academic job, I had always had that sort of interest in kind of pragmatic on the ground work. So it wasn't sufficiently interesting for me to sit around and debate theory. I really wanted to get on the ground and work with people. And I think that ended up being a kind of leitmotif of how I pursued my career.
I completely see how you ended up being so community focused. And what really stood out to me is when you mentioned that Peace Corps, it was a volunteering project, and you said you spent 3 years with Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And you described that project as, to quote you, a bit of useless. This reminded me a bit, and you can share more if you want or not. This reminded me of actually a lot of stories I've been hearing lately about some volunteering projects, sending people from high-income countries to more limited resource settings with this idea to make a good image, while actually they're not really contributing to the communities.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that's something that also inspired you to do the real work if you go on the ground and work with communities.
I think I mean, there is, I would say some chagrin, honestly, in being kind of, a white middle class Californian going over on the dime of the U.S. government to, parachute into I mean, there are lots of things that make me cringe about it from my current perspective. Lots. Um, and, for any listeners, yeah, if you want to, if you want to criticize me, you're more than welcome to do that. What I would say that the Peace Corps, I mean, and I guess the other thing is one doesn't want to go into these situations and actually do harm. And I think that can also be one of the byproducts of these kinds of voluntary activities that can be really problematic because young people are being sent out without really sufficient training um, in what actually they're doing and the kinds of circumstances that they're interacting in. Maybe some technical training, yes, but that kind of cross-cultural interaction, in what particular context one might be, suddenly finding themselves in. There's a lot of problems there. And I can't remember what I was going to say about that, but
I no, of course, don't worry. I really like the point of no one comes in wanting to do harm. That's absolutely, and no one should be in a place of judgment for everyone that goes into something with a good heart. But yeah, if you realize that obviously this is not the best way, you just have to be critical and that's it. And you're in a place and now with the knowledge that you can change these things. So in the
One
end, every experience is good.
Yeah, one of the things that somebody, a colleague once pointed out to me is that, like, look, the Peace Corps and similar voluntary organizations, so they may not do all that much in terms of development per se, however we want to define that. But what they do, what they are effective at is providing a kind of training ground for researchers who move on and, become, I don't know, anthropologists,
Hmm.
development economists, all sorts of uh, professions that could potentially be useful. Uh,
Okay.
and
Like,
so, and
so
so
they're more opening up the space for some other changes to come in.
you get some training or you get some experience, and then you can draw from that experience and move on and do something that may be more useful.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I completely agree. It's really, it's still doing something and just learning from it and continuing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you got introduced to anthropology. As someone that's from biomedical sciences background, I would love to know more of what it means to be studying infectious diseases that I know you focus on a lot through an anthropological lens, and why is it important to look purely beyond the clinical perspective of infectious diseases?
Hmm. Um, so exploring that from an anthropological lens means situating, for instance, those host pathogen interactions in much larger scales to understand the various processes that might shape those interactions. So it isn't just about, okay, so what the pathogen does to the host and the various um, interactions that might take place. I think the story of zoonotic spillovers, of epidemics and pandemics is as much a story of kind of large scale socio-ecological, political, economic processes as it is about pathogen entering a host and, laying waste to whatever's going on inside of that host. So in a sense, what I try to do is say, look, we have to understand what's going on at much broader scales. And so that's what I contribute. We question the assumptions, the terms, the categories um, that public health researchers, biomedical researchers use. We ask questions about it. We show the tensions in it. We show where some of the contradictions might lie. And then finally, one of the things that we try to do as medical anthropologists is really to kind of counterpose um, biomedical public health knowledge, which is understood as what is true, with the knowledge of people who are living on the frontiers of epidemics, of zoonotic spillovers, and the like.
That's so that's opening up a whole new world for me at the moment. Honestly, I had history of biology when I was at university, but that was
Mm.
kind of it. From taking things in this really broader context, of course, there is this context of obviously taking into account the social sciences, but yes, definitely going that broad, I'm really thinking of how sometimes when I do a research project, really just arrive just in this point in time and trying to,
Mhm.
as you said, just understand the mechanism behind the disease and what's the way to treat it or to diagnose it. While, yeah, by just missing the entire story behind it, that could also maybe be our guiding light forward. Yeah. Um, I wanted to continue something that you have also been mentioning is zoonotic reasons for disease emergence.
Mhm.
So I know that your research on human interactions with great apes and disease transmission,
Mm.
it's such a powerful reminder on how what we do impacts truly every being on this planet
Mhm.
and the immense responsibility we have. And this includes climate change, diseases, and habitat destruction, just to name a few. So I know that you have studies on this, and can you tell us from everything that you collected, can you tell us what can we do right now to protect these endangered species from everything that we have imposed into them, including infectious diseases?
That's a tough one because, there are certain things that are within maybe within the realm of what we can do, and then there are other processes that are much bigger than you and me, right? So, we did actually come out with uh, a series of recommendations. One is, which is a very social sciences argument, or a recommendation, is a real need to dialogue with people who live with great apes and interact with them often. Another of the recommendations that we made is the development of climate plans that really acknowledge the realities of climate change, of economic drivers, of population growth, and the like. One of the great difficulties is that, I mean, yes, we need to conserve these great ape species because there is a possibility that at least some of them may not survive, in the coming decades. And at the same time, I mean, one of the things that I also recognize and that worries me is that the conservation plans tend to be implemented in some of the poorest parts of the planet where people may not have access to, uh, you know, reasonable livelihoods. I mean, where buying soap is a luxury, right? Where putting food on the table is exceedingly difficult because it's almost impossible to raise domesticated animals because of things like trypanosomiasis or, whatever it is that's passing through and that hits some domesticated animals. So this is an equity question too. And I think one of my concerns is that, yes, we need the conservation. This is really crucial, but we also need to do it in such a way that takes into account the realities and the fact that we're asking some of the poorest people on the planet to kind of shoulder the burden of doing that. Um, so I think we need to think very carefully um, about how that happens. And then finally, one of the recommendations was that researchers use technology to minimize risk to great apes. That's not my domain, but the idea being that we have greater separation between researchers so that researchers are not infecting uh, non-human primates, great apes in particular, with human diseases.
Okay, that was really such a wholesome overview and exactly so many things we have to take into account. I think that's so much to think about. I'm actually very excited to go into the topic of the Sonar Cities project. It's actually how we got in touch in the seminar of preparedness and response.
Mhm.
And yeah, we talked about how to be prepared for the next crisis. That was the main topic of the seminar. And what really drew me to you and really, really made me excited to contact you was that when you made comments, you always brought back the conversation to the human aspect and to always consider everyone and not leaving anyone at the margin, which is I always feel like it's kind of been my guiding light also
Mhm.
when going to global health. So I really wanted to ask you more about Sonar Cities project. I find it such a such an exciting initiative. I feel like it's also a young initiative. So I'm curious where it will go. But if you could tell us more about the project and, well, what is Sonar Cities project?
Mhm.
I know that some cities are involved, and one of those cities is Zagreb.
Yeah.
And well, I'm from Zagreb, and in times of COVID, when I was there in 2020, we had an earthquake.
Yes.
So I was really curious if that was one of the things you were also involved in, and maybe from that experience or any other of working with Sonar Cities, um, what are what are the things that we can do better uh,
Mhm.
at a governmental level, but also very importantly for the listeners is what can we, anyone, do better as a part of the community.
Wow. Okay. Huge. Um, so
We
Sonar
can take it step by step.
advice. That's good.
Step by step.
So Sonar Cities is a European Commission funded project in which we are looking at the health and social consequences of climate induced health emergencies and disasters. Recognizing that the Zagreb earthquake is not really climate induced, but it was certainly something that was superimposed on the COVID-19 pandemic. And we look at the consequences of these emergencies for populations experiencing vulnerabilities and those populations that are living in cities. So we look at vulnerable or populations experiencing vulnerabilities because I think as I explained earlier, this is not a small proportion of our populations, either in Europe or I would hazard in the world. Um, this is a very large part of the people that we live with. So what we're doing with that research is we have uh, it's a project with 12 12 partners, and we have 6 cities that we're focusing on in Europe, of which Zagreb is one. We have a wonderful team from University of Zagreb um, uh, that, in fact, did indeed study um, the COVID-19 and the 2020 earthquakes, and tried to understand the consequences for particular people in that city. So, what we're doing in each of these cities is we've done and continue to do an analysis of these emergencies and how particular populations fared, how they may have been marginalized or excluded. And then we're creating what we call co-creation stakeholder boards. And those are boards with um, local authorities, with frontline responders, and critically, people from these communities that had been vulnerabilized. And those co-creation stakeholder boards are deciding on what the kind of priorities are for future planning, future preparedness for one kind of emergency or another. They will then select specific tools that will be piloted and evaluated. And what we'll do in the end is to create a kind of Sonar Cities tool set with a manual, with a video, etc., that can be promulgated, adapted, used in other cities, not just in Europe, but in other locations. And so I think I'll stop with that, just sort of describing. So you asked actually what governments can do better. What can we all
Yes.
do?
Yeah, and
Um,
now with that we're talking, I'm also wondering, this way that you're collecting information, you're taking it specifically from the cities, from the
yes,
knowledge of what has happened in the cities, but then collecting kind of this toolbox so it can be applied everywhere.
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Okay. So going to the next question about, yeah, what governments can do. And I mean, it's also, I mean, there's this toolbox, but I'm also thinking it's very specific also per city. I don't know how you experience that.
It is true. And the cities are different because they're all dealing with different different events. So in Zagreb, yes, it was earthquake. In Vienna, they're looking at heat waves. In Ljubljana in Slovenia, they're looking at kind of the layered um, both COVID and extreme weather, and particularly floods. In Udine in Italy, again, it's COVID and yes, they're dealing with some extreme weather as well. Stockholm is addressing exclusively COVID. So, every place is a little bit different. That said, we do have a kind of comparative methodology. So while we want to respect the specificity of specific events, specific emergencies, and specific cities, we've also been able to underscore that there are, despite the variety of populations, contexts, governments, emergencies, there are some cross-cutting um, thematics or cross-cutting features across all of these different cities. And the other thing is actually, I think the other point that seemed to come out across all of the cities where we were working was that communities themselves are really critically important. We have colleagues at the World Health Organization who argue, yeah, epidemics start and end in communities, and they're absolutely right. So one of the things that we saw in our retrospective analyses across cities was there was a lot of informal assistance, not coordinated by the city, not coordinated by the state. For instance, in Ljubljana, um, there were migrant groups from Central Africa who organized themselves to go out and help people who were affected by unexpected floods.
It's a really good thing, how to say, very unexpected in times of emergency, but there's really this beautiful human aspect that comes out of it. Because I remember for Zagreb as well, I don't have that many knowledge knowing what's organized by government or whatnot, but I don't think that people who really offered, I don't think that was mobilized by the government. I think it was people just feeling such deep empathy for everyone around them. I know that at one point, news were saying in Zagreb that people should stop helping to come because there was too much traffic and they don't know what to do with so many helpers. So that was actually a good problem to have at the time. I really I actually now remember that.
One example that's not from Europe, but in fact from Central Africa. So within the Sonar Cities project, we've also developed something called the Social Sciences Emergency Support Network. And that is a network that anybody can join. You join through our Sonar Global Association, and the Emergency Support Network intervenes when somebody, maybe an authority or, a humanitarian organization contacts us and says, hey, could you help us with something? It could be a training, it could be developing a protocol. And in this case, it was a research action. During the Mpox epidemic in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in a very poor informal settlement in Kinshasa. And one of the things that we did in the course of that project was to create a community surveillance program with recovered patients from Mpox. This is an informal settlement which is incredibly poor. There are a lot of sex workers there, and who have been highly stigmatized, excluded, etc. And it's also an informal settlement in which there have been recurrent epidemics. So we helped them to create an association. So they now have an association of recovered patients. It's basically the health sector to go out and sensitize people to the problem of mpox, to help identify people who may be infected, and to encourage them when they're absolutely terrified to come and get tested and get treated. And they were so effective in that in a subsequent epidemic, which was a cholera epidemic that hit in the same place, this association of recovered survivors was mobilized to do the same thing, but for a cholera epidemic. So recovered patients can be a hugely important group to integrate into epidemic response.
Yeah,
And it should
yeah,
be done more systematically.
yeah. I think that's such a wonderful example. I see in this example, it I feel like the answer might be that it takes both. At least in this example, it does take some systematic arranging from an organization or government. It's important, of course, which kind of community you make and which kind of people you ask. In this case, to help out and to give their perspective. And yeah, in the end, kind of feels that it's just it's so important to make that community. And I feel like also if that there's already a lot out there that that there's people carrying a lot of knowledge already that we might
Okay.
not highlight enough and give enough value to.
Mm,
Yeah.
totally
So that
agree.
actually, um, you mentioned now we've been talking about vulnerable populations, and you mentioned for example, sex workers and people just that are not in in good living conditions. I can assume that for you, it's also not easy being exposed to those kind of situations all the time. I'm wondering how you cope with that.
Mm,
In a sense, do you have, you know, do you have something that you say to yourself on a morning when you know it's gonna be a bit of more of a challenging day to go through, or in the evening when it was like that, or
yeah.
maybe just something that's guiding you every day?
I mean, I think one of the things that guides me is that I love what I do. And I love, well, okay. So I don't love having to deal with budgets. I don't love having to, like the kind of, every job has its sort of parts that are less scintillating, I guess is the way to put it. There is no such thing as a perfect job. But honestly, the job that I have is pretty fabulous. I get to work with wonderful people. I get to go out, not as often as I'd like, but I get to go out and do field work and learn interesting things and make connections with people who might be totally different from me. But yet there is a way that um, we can at least try to come to some kind of mutual understanding, and that and I love the fact that I can sort of help train, cultivate young researchers who can go out and probably do what I do a lot better than the way I've done it. So, I mean, I mean, if you want to think about job satisfaction, I mean, that's it right there. And I know I'm really fortunate. If I were maybe your age or younger, I probably couldn't reproduce my career. I couldn't. I've just been incredibly fortunate, and I'm aware of that and recognize how challenging it is for young researchers to kind of make their way and figure out kind of what do I want to do? Where do I want to do it? Is it even realistic for me to get a job in that domain? So, I mean, I'm acutely aware of how difficult that is. So that's actually something, I mean, just the fact that I can do what I do and that I have the tremendous fortune of being able to do it, um, I think is something that keeps me going every day. I'm never bored.
Wow. That's so inspiring to hear, honestly. Wow, I want to also acknowledge the fact I love how you keep saying that you're so lucky, but I'm sure that I'm I believe that just luck comes obviously to the ones that are always open to it and are open to a lot of opportunities. And through what I've heard, you sound like someone that I'm sure has been open to a lot of things that have come in your life, in your career. But I hear so much gratefulness here. I hear that it's just like your grounding every day is how grateful you are to even be here and
Yeah.
uh, connect with people. I think that's what you mentioned about passing on the knowledge and connecting with different people from all over the world. I, I love how kind of people are at the center of it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. I think that's something so beautiful to take away for me, for anyone who's listening, as an advice on what to look out for when they're dreaming of their ideal career.
Yeah, and I think that's critically important.
The next question with the role that people have in your life, colleagues, friends, or family. Um, I welcome you to share more, but I can imagine how much you acknowledge them in everything that you have achieved.
Absolutely. I'm incredibly fortunate, I think, to have, quite a wonderful, loving family. My spouse is also a researcher. He's a biomedical researcher, an entomologist, vector vector person, but always understood, what it means to be a researcher, how much stress there is involved, because there is a fair amount of stress, when you've got to get the paper out. You've got to go get your next grant. Something isn't going the right way. You've hit a blockage with an ethics committee, or and don't quite know how to deal with it, or the funds are stuck someplace else that and you can't get it to the right place. So being within that kind of milieu with somebody else who totally gets how it works, I think is really useful. And I again very I'm really grateful to some really key mentors and friends who intervened at particular moments and who really made me think about, at certain junctures in my life, what do I what do I want to do? Is it is it is it feasible? Am I cut out for it? Can I
Yeah.
can I can I really do that? Um, so
Yeah,
that's also, I think, really important.
absolutely. Because we all feel like that at so many points in our lives. I don't think our doubts get, how to say, smaller over time. I can imagine that
Yeah.
they get different and we all have them. And yeah, when you say it to your loved ones around you or whoever is supporting you, I know that right people just, well, take those doubts away.
Yeah, and I think yeah, I mean, I think also I mean, I was glad that you sort of underscored the point about gratitude because, I think that, I mean, yeah, I could get up in the morning and complain, it's like, "Ah, I've got nothing but meetings today. I don't have time to write. I've got a grant proposal due." I mean, I could actually focus on just that, but I think what I try to focus on it and, is that I'm immensely fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. I'm in good health. I can work with interesting people at, in all different domains, and do work that I think is meaningful, and that even if a particular intervention or a particular project doesn't necessarily work, as long as it does no harm. Um, yeah, it is a part of a broader and collective effort that is at least gesturing towards making the world. I mean, I know it sounds kind of corny, but making the world maybe a little bit of a better place.
Yeah, of course. I think you're already wrapping up this conversation in such
Mm.
a nice way because I think anyone that's listening can really take this with them when they feel anxious and unsure about their future and career choices,
Mm.
and maybe just even how they feel currently today. And yeah, waking up tomorrow and oh my god, I have this and I have that, and the writing and the failed lab experiment. So really, thank you for that reminder. I have two more questions for you.
Sure.
Um, so we can make this however short or long you like, but if you could now think of going back to your 20-year-old self, thinking about what was worrying you the most at that moment, now what advice would you give to yourself and being like, oh wow, that I don't think that was worth all the stress that I had?
Oh, goodness. I think it was kind of a mess at 20. The 20s are really difficult. I have um, two children who are in their 20s, and I really kind of feel for them and their friends because I mean, it doesn't matter when it is, it's a difficult time. But now is an incredibly difficult time. I mean, there's nothing in a sense that you can count on. Um, I don't necessarily know that I don't know that I would have actually listened to myself if I had were able to give give the advice. I think what I would say to just people in general who might be listening is, um, be open to new opportunities that don't necessarily convene to what you think you must do or you expect. Again, I don't think I could reproduce my career. It's much harder to do it these days for young researchers. But don't just do something because you think you have to do it, or because that's the track that everybody follows. It's, I think, always good to plan for maybe, you know, adjacent paths, adjacent options, unexpected opportunities. I think keeping your eyes open for those things because something may, I mean, yeah, you have to actively go out and find it. But, if you have your heart set on, I want an academic career in X or Y university, that could be a kind of rough path to follow. But there may be lots of different ways that you can achieve what you're interested in um, you know, the domain of global health or, maybe planetary health that would be meaningful, fulfilling, useful to other people that don't necessarily hinge on whether you get that one job that 600 people are applying for or not.
Mm. Yeah, I absolutely. I think it's such an important advice. I know how hard I've been trying to take it myself while I was also after uni deciding what I'm gonna do and applying for various jobs. And yeah, exactly what you said, the message that I try to tell myself, even though I know it's hard, is just if something requires so much force, maybe just really, really not meant for you. In just staying open, you'll find out what it is. I think that's an excellent advice. And the just to wrap it out, what gives you hope about the future of global health at the moment from everything that you have seen?
Okay, there's a lot. Okay, I'll start with the negative and then I'll move on to what I hope might be something. So there's a lot to be grim about with global health. I mean, we've seen, a massive reduction in funding, not just coming from the United States, but that certainly was not helpful in any sense of the word, the hollowing out of the World Health Organization and the like. And I've even heard some colleagues talk about the death of global health. That said, um, I have hope in two things. One is that there are younger generations of researchers, practitioners who are profoundly committed, who are highly multidisciplinary. I mean, 10 years ago, it was really trying to convince people, okay, you're in public health, you recognize the need for epidemiology, et cetera, but, what about the social sciences? Whereas now I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I mean, people, they just get it. So that's one thing that gives me hope. I think another thing in the last, I would say, year or so, I've been thinking with a group of people, a group of social scientists about planetary health, and that we need to be rethinking our relationships with each other and with other life forms on the rest of the planet. And as we have kind of younger generations who are increasingly cognizant of the damage that previous generations have inflicted on this planet, and a real awareness that our health hinges on the health of this planet. I think that's something that I hope younger generations will pick up and move forward and think about it in terms of equity.
I agree with everything you have said, and I do I do see it really in young people. This, I mean, I don't know how it was before, but I see this more awareness and more of this action and a desire not to repeat some things from before.
Yeah.
And yeah, hopefully that's gonna move us all forward. So really thank you for that answer. I think it was a perfect way um, to wrap up, and especially in the context of also what you said, that there's also a lot of n- not good things happening.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can reverse some of that damage. So thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation with you
Me
so
too.
much. I could I could really keep on going. Thank you so much for your time
No problem.
and
It's
for your
lovely.
way of speaking. Really, not only for all the knowledge that we gained during this conversation, but I feel like there's such groundness to you, and that you have that effect on anyone that's listening. So thank you.
Oh, I mean, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I think your questions are wonderful, and I wish you the best in this podcast. I can't wait to hear, who else you're going to be interviewing in the coming weeks. So please keep me posted.